All right, well, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hope you can all have a good view of the screen from where you are. Nice to see you. Not a rhetorical question. How many of you have ever heard of this the doctrine of interposition before in your life? How many have not? Put it that way. Okay. Of those of you who have heard of it, have you heard much spoken on it? Books, a big topic, or is it pretty much kind of a dark doctrine? Not dark doctrine, but an unknown doctrine for you. It is a dark. It was a very dark doctrine for King George III. We'll talk about that for sure. All right, another question for you, if I may. And this is rhetorical. I know you know the answer to this one. This question is, how do you fix things? And of course, there's a lot of answers to that, but what I'm really kind of aiming at is you really never fix things without tools, do you?
Without what?
Tools.
Oh, tools. Oh.
Tools. The kind you work with in your hands. There's other kinds of tools. But we're talking about the kinds you use to fix things. And part of my thought here tonight and what I want to try to communicate is that we have certain tools that we've been given by God to fix things. And one of them is interposition. And if we don't understand this doctrine, and if we don't understand this particular tool that we've been given by God, we won't be able to fix anything. That's one of the things I want to communicate. Another thing something else I want to communicate is that interposition is a tool in addition to another tool we've been given, which is quite unwelcome in the church. And believe it or not, interposition is quite unwelcome in the church. But there's another one that's unwelcome, and that's the imprecatory psalms. The imprecatory psalms are not welcome, by and large, in most Christian circles of which I am familiar. And they are also a tool as well. But can we see from the very beginning, can we agree, can we understand from the very beginning that if God has given us tools to fix things, and we refuse to use the tools He's given to us, then we can't expect to fix much of anything. Someone said one time, if God gives you a watch, do you honor Him more by asking Him all the time what time it is, or by looking at the watch and figuring it out, since that's what He gave you the watch for? You see, we hear all the time things like, well, God can fix it, well, God can do it. Well, congratulations, of course He can. But He's chosen other means to get things done that involve us. Quick example. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. How? God made Adam and Eve, did He not? He could have filled the earth Himself. But He didn't want to fill it up Himself. He gave that job to Adam and Eve and their descendants to fill the earth. Interposition is such a doctrine, as we'll see. It's been given to us as a gift from God in order to fix certain things. The third thing I really want to communicate tonight is maybe. I want you to think this way a little bit. Maybe the way to fix things maybe isn't quite as difficult as what you think. We tend to think in large terms of fixing the president, of fixing the Congress, of fixing everything. And clearly there's a lot of fixing to be done. But in history, God in His mercy has raised up those who have stepped into the breach. And sometimes it doesn't take a whole gaggle of people. Sometimes it just takes one. And God has been merciful to raise them up. Interposition, is it biblical? Okay. Now, is this doctrine really under attack? Well, let me just put it this way. When the father of our country, George Washington, mentions specifically interposition in his Thanksgiving address, or his address to create Thanksgiving, and mentions interposing or interposition in that address, you would have to know that those to whom he was speaking would know what he was talking about. So it was a doctrine that was embraced and understood at one time in the founding of this country. That was then, this is now. We all know, come thou fount of every blessing. We know that, right? Yeah, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Yeah. Is it the second verse? He to rescue me from danger. Remember it? Interpose his precious blood. But have you noticed the more recent hymn books? Bought me with his precious blood. Yeah, that's what's going on in some of the more later hymn books. Some later hymn books, I've seen it. Now, I'm not going to argue with bought me with his precious blood, but we're not using the word anymore because nobody knows what it means. It's a foreign word now. No one knows what that word means, so let's just do something else. Well, hopefully, beginning tonight, we're going to roll back the tide on that, and we're going to reintroduce this wonderful doctrine from the Scriptures. Our study will address the following. What is an interposition? What is it? It's a definition. Where did the doctrine come from? A bunch of guys sitting around a table. So, let's try the interposition thing. Let's call it, I know, interposition. To whom does the doctrine apply? Why is it necessary? So we have to answer that. Do we see evidence of this doctrine in our country today? And then our sixth question, is interposition a command or merely an option? Interposition is the doctrine that lesser magistrates, lower ranking or local government officials have a duty to impose or place themselves between the people they represent and the higher magistrate, the king, president, or federal government, when the higher magistrate departs from the law of God and violates the God-given rights of the people. And require, their duty, to step in between and require the higher magistrate to either conform to the laws of God and the rights of the people. Should the king refuse to do so, interposition means the lower magistrates have the right and duty to depose him and replace him with another ruler. Sounds almost treasonous, doesn't it?
It sounds pretty enticing.
It does sound enticing. That's Colonel John Eidsmoe. I want to talk about him briefly because he knows a little bit about what he's talking about here. He went through the ROTC program in the 60s. Now, those of you that remember the 60s, or those of us that remember the 60s, remember the whole Weathermen movement and the Students for a Democratic Society and the hippie movement and the drugs and the dropouts and so forth. And it was kind of odd because on one hand the hippies were dropping out of society, on the other hand they were marching down to Washington D.C. against the Vietnam War, burning banks, attacking ROTC buildings and so forth. So John Eidsmoe, as an ROTC officer at the time, officer in training, felt that it was his duty to defend the civil authorities from these drugged out hippie freak types on their way back to Eden, but stopping off on the way to burn down a building or two. You know, the road back to Eden is not always straight. You have to take a detour every once in a while. So he does this in his position as an officer. Well, he later on goes to college and gets his law degree, and he begins to take up cases. And many of the cases that he begins to get are cases of Christian schoolers or homeschoolers who are under attack by the same government that he's defending, and he's scratching his head a little bit. He's scratching his head. Wait a minute, I'm defending them over here, but these same people that I'm defending are now attacking these people who just want to educate their own children. Let's see now, they haven't robbed a bank, they haven't attacked their neighbor and sold his children off into slavery someplace. They haven't committed any crimes that we know of. In fact, last time I checked, most of them are like tax-paying citizens and whatnot. Why are we attacking them? So he had to really do some thinking about this particular doctrine. What's a Christian man, officer in the army, lawyer, constitutional, what's he supposed to do? How are you supposed to look at this whole situation? So he thought about this long and hard. Let me just back up a little bit. Interposition here, the doctrine that lesser magistrates have a duty. Have a duty. You know what? I'd be thrilled if the lesser magistrates today even thought they had an option. Duty. Duty. To interpose or place themselves between the people they represent and the higher magistrate. Should the king refuse to conform to the laws of God and the rights of the people, should the king refuse to do so, interposition means the lower magistrates have the right and duty, once again, to depose him and replace him with another ruler. Please note, interposition can and does apply to the civil magistrate. That was one of the questions. To whom does it apply? It applies to the civil magistrate. Not just the civil magistrate, but it certainly applies to him or her. For her, yeah. This is 2013. Interposition is the duty of the civil magistrate. Not just the option, but the duty. And the standard to follow is the laws of God and the rights of the people. By the way, what document do we consult to see if we can figure out what the rights of the people are? I only know of one document.
Constitution.
Actually, there's one document even greater than that.
Right.
That would be the Bible.
Come on.
That would be the Bible. Sure enough. Well, where did the doctrine come from? James Madison? Sam Adams? Sitting around the table? If that was the case, then interposition would not have existed before the 1770s, right? Or 1760s, right? But it did exist before that. God graciously gives the doctrine as a protection, not from the wrath of man, but from the wrath of God. Not in a social setting, but in a family setting. That's initially. Initially. He initially gave this doctrine. Think about this. To protect us from his own wrath. Look at this. Exodus 4:24 through 26. This is Moses we're talking about. And it came to pass by the way in the inn that the Lord met him, Moses, and sought to kill him. Then Zipporah, that's his wife, took a sharp stone and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at his feet and said, "Surely a bloody husband art thou to me." So he let him go. God let him go. Then she said, "A bloody husband thou art because of the circumcision." Now what in the world? Now, this is just one that's kind of obscure passage. Obscure passage, I don't know if I can say that. But it's a short passage in the book of Exodus. There's a whole lot of other things going on. Of course, the main event of the book of Exodus is the people get out of Dodge. The Egyptians and Pharaoh get what's coming to them. And they get out and they begin their journey towards civilization, if you will. This slave people gets out of there by the great and mighty hand of God. In the middle of this, you have this small, shall we say, kind of really compact little statement about Moses and God had just called Moses and told him to get back down to Egypt. He didn't want to go, but he finally persuaded him to do it. He goes back. Moses is going to be the guy now to lead him out. And before it even gets going, we have this incident where God, the one that called Moses down, is trying to kill Moses. What in the world is going on here? What are we to think of this? We have here, within the family, and saving her husband from the wrath of God himself, Moses' wife interposing. That is what we have here. Now why? Why do we have this? Could we not have just had Exodus without this? Let me ask you something. Was it necessary for Moses to learn the doctrine of interposition? Would the doctrine of interposition served, well, maybe not him so much, but the children of Israel, would that doctrine have maybe served them well over the next 40 years of their lives? You can be sure the answer is absolutely yes. How many times did they sin against God and Moses and Aaron fall on their face and pray to God to stop the plague? How about the time when Moses was up on the mountain? You think the doctrine of interposition is obscure? Is not really in the Bible unless you have to read into it? Are you kidding? When Moses is up there on the mountain, God announces to Moses, remember, the way Moses found out that things had gone south down below was he didn't see it himself at first. God told him. And God told him, get down there right now. They're ruining everything. And by the way, I'm just done with them. I'm done. I'm going to make a new nation starting with you. And Moses, who understands the doctrine of interposition, at least from what happened with his wife earlier, perhaps from other sources, begins to pray and remind God that he had just taken his people out of Egypt, and everybody was shocked at this. And if he killed the people right now, if he wiped them out, then people would forget what a great God he was and not understand. They think it would happen by natural causes, is basically Moses' argument. And God stops. Moses interposed on behalf of the children of Israel at that moment. Can we not say, humanly speaking, that if Moses doesn't stand up and interpose, the children of Israel are completely wiped out? It'd be like the flood all over again, kind of like on a smaller scale. The doctrine comes from God, not from a bunch of people sitting around thinking, let's come up with something new. From God Himself. And think about this: if God developed this doctrine to save us from His own wrath, how much more do we need this to save it from the wrath of man? How much more? That's not the first time. Remember Abraham in Genesis 19, he prayed for saving the lives of 2 whole cities if enough righteous people could be found within those cities. Clearly, the only human thing standing between these cities and complete destruction was Abraham. You recall? God says, you know what? I'm coming down for a reason. This is God Himself. Think about the situation here. God making a personal visit to earth, personally, for one reason. I have a plan in mind. I came down here to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. That's why I'm here. And Abraham prays, and God listens to Abraham's prayer and promises not to destroy those cities if a certain amount of righteous people can be found there. Do you understand the power and the context of what was happening there? I mean, Abraham's a great man. If it were me, and God Himself came down and said, this is what I'm going to do, if it were me, I'd be like, I'm staying out of the way. Abraham understood interposition. He got it. Think about it. Instead of asking when has God required an intermediary, i.e. an interposer, ask this question instead. When has He not sought someone to act on behalf of His people? When has He not wanted someone to interpose? We really see this throughout the Scriptures. Think of the Old Testament prophets standing in the breach, standing in the gap. All throughout the Scriptures, we see this doctrine played out again, again, and again. Where do we see it? Well, give you some quick examples. We don't have to spend a lot of time on these. Abigail and Nabal, for example. Don't know if you remember this particular passage, what happened here. But in this case, well, let's go back a little bit. David had protected the family of Nabal and Abigail. Nabal being the husband. When things were dicey, when things were difficult. Later on, David and his men needed something to eat. He sent messengers on ahead and said, hey, we're hungry. You guys have an awful lot to eat. We protected you before. How about something to eat? And Nabal said, who is David? I'm caring for this guy. David gets angry and says, you know what? This is not a situation that's going to stand. We're coming down, and everybody dies. You shouldn't have said that, Nabal. Abigail sees what's happening. She immediately sends food to David. She says, listen, he shouldn't have spoken that way. Come on up and get something to eat. Does that sound like interposition to you? You bet. Of course it was. See, again, you see this interposition thing not, we tend to think of it as like this big thing that happens in the state only. But it's all throughout the Bible, all kinds of levels. We see a family in the state there, state and God, David and Saul's son, 2 Samuel 21. That's the case. We don't have time to look at it. But that's the case where God had sent a famine, a literal famine, to Judah, on Judah and Israel. And David prays and says, why do we have this famine? And God says it's because of Saul's sons. They went and they killed the Gibeonites. The Gibeonites, you may or may not recall, were somewhat traditional enemies of the Israelites, but they had made a deal with Joshua. Joshua didn't really realize what was going on, and the Israelites had sworn to protect them and not to kill them. Well, later on, Saul and his sons kill them. God later on sends a famine. David prays God, says, what's going on? God says it's because of Saul and because of his sons and what they did to the Gibeonites. Saul goes to the Gibeonites and says, what do you want? They say, we don't want money. We do not want, we just want you to punish those people that did that to us, tried to kill us off. And they do that. They punish them with death. They put them to death, which was what they deserved for their murderous behavior. And God stops the famine. Interposition throughout. Church and state. Well, I want to go to state church. I want to go to Jeremiah 26 for a minute. Let's spend some time here. Jeremiah was a man who understood this doctrine. By the way, earlier on, I said that interposition is a tool that God has given us, as are the imprecatory Psalms. Jeremiah was a man that understood the imprecatory Psalms too. It's not very well known, but Jeremiah is called the weeping prophet because he loved the people so much and he hated to see what was happening to them. Jeremiah was a man who employed the imprecatory Psalms. The imprecatory Psalms are not just some corner thing somewhere that we just, when we read through the book of Psalms, because we've got to read through the Bible, we just read those imprecatory Psalms and say, well, man, I don't know what that is, but let's just keep on going. No, you can see uses for those Psalms throughout the Scriptures, and Jeremiah, if you read through Jeremiah, on 2 occasions, used imprecatory prayers to God extensively. Tools that Jeremiah used. All right, now Jeremiah chapter 26. Here we go. Jeremiah's ministry. In the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, the word came from the Lord, saying, thus says the Lord, this is to Jeremiah now, stand in the court of the Lord's house and speak to all the cities of Judah, which come to worship in the Lord's house, all the words that I command you to speak to them. Do not diminish a word. Perhaps everyone will listen and turn from his evil way, that I may relent concerning the calamity which I purpose to bring on them because of the evil of their doings. And you shall say to them, thus says the Lord, if you will not listen to me to walk in my law, which I have set before you, to heed the words of my servants the prophets whom I sent to you, both rising up early and sending them, but you have not heeded, then I will make this house like Shiloh, and will bring this city to a curse, to all the nations of the earth, and they will know. Shiloh was a city in the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom at this point had already been carried away, and Shiloh had been completely destroyed. And the northern tribe thought it would never be destroyed because it was God's house, they said. And here's God saying, no, I'm going to make this whole place like Shiloh. And everybody knew what Shiloh meant, or was at that point. So the priests and the prophets and all the people heard Jeremiah speaking these words in the house of the Lord. Now note there, the priests and the prophets and all the people heard Jeremiah. Now it happened when Jeremiah had made an end of speaking all that the Lord had commanded him to speak to all the people, that the priests and the prophets and all the people seized him, saying, you will surely die. Why have you prophesied in the name of the Lord, saying, this house shall be like Shiloh, and the city shall be desolate without an inhabitant? And all the people were gathered against Jeremiah in the house of the Lord. Now remember, who's upset at Jeremiah now? It's the very people that should have been welcoming his message, right? The priests and the prophets. And guess what? They want to kill him. Not a good situation. When the princes of Judah, okay, now we just went from priests and prophets to princes. So we just went from the ecclesiastical leadership to the political leadership. Okay? The princes, the political leadership gets a hold of this. They want to kill Jeremiah because of his prophecy. When the princes of Judah heard these things, they came up from the king's house to the house of the Lord and sat down in the entry of the new gate of the Lord's house. And the priests and the prophets spoke to the princes and all the people, saying, this man, this is priests and prophets talking now, this man, Jeremiah, deserves to die, for he has prophesied against this city, as you have heard with your ears. Then Jeremiah spoke to all the princes and all the people, saying, the Lord sent me to prophesy against this house and against this city with all the words that you have heard. Now therefore amend your ways and your doings and obey the voice of the Lord your God. Then the Lord will relent concerning the doom that he has pronounced against you. As for me, here I am, in your hand. Do with me as what seems good and proper to you, but know for certain that if you put me to death, you will surely bring innocent blood on yourselves and the city and on its inhabitants. For truly the Lord has sent me to you to speak all these words in your hearing. Do you get the drama? Jeremiah speaking on behalf of his life. I just love this man. If there was ever a time to modify your message, this would have been the time. Not Jeremiah. He gives it to him again. Wow. Wow. Well, so the princes, political leadership again. So the princes and all the people said to the priests and the prophets, this man does not deserve to die, for he has spoken to us in the name of the Lord our God. Then certain of the elders, political leadership again, of the land rose up and spoke to all the assembly of the people, saying, Micah of Moresheth prophesied, this is the prophet Micah, prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, and spoke to all the people of Judah, saying, thus says the Lord of hosts. And they quote Micah's message. And this was probably about 100 years later. Zion shall be plowed like a field, Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the temple like the bare hills of the forest. And that exact quote is in the book of Micah. You can find it there. They quoted it accurately. And then they go on to say, did Hezekiah, king of Judah, and all Judah ever put him to death? Did he not fear the Lord and seek the Lord's favor? And the Lord relented concerning the doom which he had pronounced against them. But we are doing great evil against ourselves. We got a real bad situation here. The ecclesiastical leadership wants to put a prophet to death for speaking in the name of the Lord, and it's the politicians that come out and save his life. Interposition. Not only that, but towards the end of the chapter, nevertheless, and Jeremiah certainly had his enemies. I mean, you read about Jeremiah, I mean, he was in the middle of court intrigue all the time, plots against his life, people trying to defend him, people trying to attack him, friends, enemies everywhere, all the while trying to get him to shut up, which is the last thing that dear man would ever be able to do. It's one thing he was never able to do, was keep quiet. Well, nevertheless, the hand of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, was with Jeremiah, so that they should not give him into the hand of the people to put him to death. Shaphan was apparently a court official. Jeremiah had friends within the court who constantly interposed on his behalf. Now, I read that for a couple of reasons. One, to show you how this whole doctrine of interposition was a huge part of Jeremiah's entire life. But the other reason is, or was, shall I say, that there are people that say that politicians should never protect preachers. That the civil authority should never protect the ecclesiastic. They should just trust God. Well, perhaps you're trusting God, and his answer may be to have the civil authorities protect you, as they did Jeremiah here. I've heard it said of Luther that he didn't really trust God because Prince Frederick the Wise protected him. I don't know how much you know about that, but the Pope was always trying to kill Luther. I mean, he was just trying again and again. And Frederick the Wise I believe he knew Christ. Jeremiah, or back then, I mean, Germany was, communication was hard, and the Pope never just couldn't quite catch up with Luther. At one time, Frederick even kidnapped him and kept him in his castle for a while. It was there that Luther translated the New Testament into German. A huge event for the time. But what would happen is that the Pope would say, hey, you got to turn him over to me, and Frederick the Wise would say, okay, I'll look for him, and send a message back. I can't find him, but I'll keep looking. And meanwhile, he was someplace else, and he was just able to constantly play the Pope off with that kind of nonsense, and he just kept on giving back to him. And Frederick the Wise was smart enough to know there was nothing the Pope could really do about it anyway. At that time, Germany was not unified really. It was a lot of different kingdoms, fiefdoms, and so forth. So I mean, if you want to say that it's never the job of the civil establishment to protect the godly men, well, you're going to have. I think you're going to have a fight with Jeremiah here in Jeremiah 26, and you're also going to have a historical battle with what happened with Luther there in Germany. Well, prophet and God, Numbers 21:7. I just want to go to the last one there. Interposition. Is there any? Now what? We'll get this back here. Is there any larger example of interposition than God and God? Didn't Christ save us from the just wrath of God? Did he not step in and take that punishment for us? The sin was going to be punished by somebody, and somebody was going to get it. It was us, unless we have someone to interpose on our behalf. He to rescue me from danger did interpose